Listen to me for a moment because this is one of those moments when you have to decide whether you're going to keep swallowing the headlines handed to you by polished public faces or whether you'll start demanding the truth, even when it's messy. I've always believed that honesty matters more than optics. I've always believed that the people who claim the loudest to be our moral compass should be held to the highest standards. So today I want to speak plainly about something that has shaken me, and I'm going to say it exactly how I would say it to you if we were standing face to face. A private phone call came into my hands. The words I heard were not the polished talking points we expect from leaders. They were raw, they were real, and they were, frankly, shocking. The person on the other end of that line is someone many of you have trusted for years. Today, I want to tell you what I heard, why it matters, and what it exposes about truth, loyalty, and leadership. I'm not in the business of drama for drama's sake. I'm not here to manufacture conflict, but I am in the business of truth. When you hold a megaphone and a platform, people listen. That platform brings responsibility. I always say, if you're not willing to stand behind your words in private as well as in public, then you don't deserve the platform. What I heard in that call contradicted the public posture, not by a little, but by a mile. And for anyone who's wondered whether the polished speeches and campaign stops are identical to what leaders actually think when the cameras are off, this is your answer. It forced me to ask, are our leaders performing to preserve influence, or are they leading from conviction? I'll be blunt. Charlie Kirk has built a brand, an army of young activists, and an organization that prides itself on clarity and conviction. He's been, for many, a reliable voice on conservative campuses and in conservative media, someone who rallies people and frames complex geopolitical questions in stark, easy to share sound bites. But the call I listened to offered a very different portrait, a man privately expressing frustration, doubt, and comments that, if they were to be taken at face value, undermine the narrative he sold to millions. I want to be careful with words here. This is not about personal attacks, it's about public accountability. When your private words reveal a disconnect from your public stance, people deserve to know that's not betrayal, that's transparency. In that call, the language used was not the measured diplomatic phrasing that would be expected of someone who spends their life shaping public perception. Instead, there were expressions of impatience, of exasperation, and phrases that suggested a willingness to view an ally through the lens of strategic calculation rather than principle. The tone was dismissive at times, and there were moments where the speaker questioned foundations that his public platform has long treated as sacrosanct. Now, I'm not going to invent specifics you can't verify. That's not my goal. What I am saying is this: the substance and tone of that conversation made it clear there is more nuance and perhaps more conflict behind the scenes than you've been told. For those who treat unwavering support for our allies as a moral absolute, this is a wake up call to look deeper. You might ask, why does this matter? Why should anyone care what two people say in private? It matters because private words from leaders often predict public behavior. They reveal the ethical compass guiding policy choices and public advocacy. If someone privately views a strategic partner as expendable or as merely a transactional benefit, that can, over time, shape policy recommendations and political alliances. And when that perspective is kept hidden behind a curtain of public cheerleading, the public cannot make informed judgments about the convictions of those they follow. That's the heart of the problem. A leader's legitimacy comes from the alignment of private conviction and public action. Let's talk about consistency. We often demand it from others. Consistency in values, consistency in principles, consistency in backing the vulnerable and standing by allies when it matters. When there's a gap between what's said on stage and what's whispered off stage, followers are left in a peculiar position. They are being asked to fight for a narrative that may not fully reflect the leader's true beliefs. That's why, as someone who prizes intellectual honesty, I felt compelled to bring this to light, not to humiliate, but to illuminate, not to sow discord, but to hold to account. If you believe in a principle, you should be able to stand by that principle with the cameras off as well as when you're broadcasting it to millions. I also want to address the predictable chorus you'll hear. This is a smear. This is betrayal. This is politics. To that I say, accountability is not betrayal. If a private conversation reveals a contradiction, it's not an attack to point that out. It's civic oversight. We live in a world where words matter, where a single phrase can shift public sentiment, where policy recommendations can follow from private grudges or private calculations. If we sweep these contradictions under the rug because we prefer the comfort of rhetorical unity, then we allow leaders to operate without scrutiny, and that is dangerous. Now, imagine the optics: a movement built on certain foreign policy convictions, elevated voices promising unwavering support for a particular ally, and then private admissions, or at least skepticism about those policies. For rank and file supporters who base their commitments on principle, this is disorienting. For those who operate politically, it's an opportunity to pivot or hedge. The political calculus becomes: how do we keep the base engaged while managing the leader's private doubts? The answer should not be calculation, it should be clarity. It's crucial to recognize another layer here: the weaponization of secrecy. We all know how politics works: alliances, negotiations, and strategy sessions. Many times, tough decisions require discretion, but secrecy becomes corrosive when it conceals a leader's real convictions from their followers. Transparency doesn't mean broadcasting every private frustration, it means ensuring that your public advocacy aligns with your lived beliefs. When the two diverge, followers have a right to question whether they are being led by principle or performance. Let me also talk about motive, because people will ask, why would I leak something like this? Why would I make public a private conversation? Motivation matters. If the motive is personal animus, then that's petty. If the motive is to gain clicks, that's cynical. But if the motive is to reveal a gap between what leaders promise publicly and what they believe privately, then it is an attempt at corrective honesty. I will be the first to admit that revealing private conversations is fraught and should not be undertaken lightly. But neither should we pretend that private words are irrelevant to public trust. My decision to bring a conversation into the light, if a decision is what it was rooted in my belief that people deserve to know who is truly steering the ship and why. How will the movement respond? There will be denials, explanations, spin. There will be attempts to frame the call as taken out of context, as selectively edited, as evidence of conspiracies. That's predictable. What should be less predictable is a demonstrated commitment to transparent dialogue. Leaders should answer questions directly. They should state, here is what I believe now, here is what I said privately, here is how I reconcile the difference. That is how you rebuild trust. You do not rebuild trust by doubling down on plausible sounding talking points while ignoring the fractures underneath. For younger activists who look up to leaders like Charlie, this moment is educational. It teaches you that loyalty to an idea matters more than loyalty to a personality. It teaches you to interrogate not just the slogans and the hashtags, but the consistency of action and belief. If you're forming your political identity around the charisma of a leader, take this as instruction to place principle above personality. The long-term health of any movement depends not on the optics of unanimity, but on the lived integrity of its leaders. Now, let me address the broader geopolitical implications without descending into sensationalism. Discussions about any nation, especially a nation as geopolitically and emotionally charged as Israel, are complex. People's relationships to a country are shaped by history, religion, strategic interest, and moral reasoning. It's entirely reasonable for serious thinkers to debate the extent and nature of support a foreign ally receives. But what is not reasonable is to privately denigrate or doubt those ties while publicly pledging fealty for the sake of influence. That hypocrisy corrodes both the moral argument and the practical strategy. If you have concerns, air them, debate them, write op-eds, argue in public, but don't mislead those who trust you. And finally, let me speak to you directly, the listener, the viewer, the person who might be sitting with tea or coffee. As you hear this, you are owed candor. You deserve to know whether those asking for your time, your energy, and your votes stand where they say they stand. Don't be distracted by the spectacle of outrage or the familiar drumbeat of he said and she said. Be curious in the right way. Ask for evidence, demand accountability, and insist on coherence between word and deed. If leaders falter, correct them with facts and principle. If they are vindicated, give them credit. But never accept the soothing balm of convenient narratives when the underlying reality is inconsistent. This moment is not the end of anything, it's a crossroads. It will expose opportunists, it will test friendships, and it will challenge institutions. But it can also be a cleansing moment if we let it. We can demand better of our leaders, not because we enjoy tearing them down, but because we understand the stakes. Leadership built on convenience does not survive rigorous scrutiny. Leadership built on conviction does. I don't want to be part of a culture that rewards polished lies. I want a movement that rewards brave honesty. So here's the challenge I leave with you: demand the truth, not the drama. Ask your leaders to account for both their public stance and their private convictions. Hold conversations to the light. And when contradictions are found, insist on repair through transparency. We will have disagreements, but let them be honest disagreements. That is how movements grow, mature, and endure. That is how nations progress. I will not apologize for bringing this to your attention. I will not apologize for insisting that public figures match their public promises with private integrity. And I certainly won't apologize for reminding you that power and principle are not the same thing. Keep watching, keep asking, keep insisting that the people who claim to represent you in politics, in activism, in public life are deserving of your trust because they live by it in private and in public.